Hello, how you doing?
Good. It's great being with you in your studio, seeing your tools and crafts.
Oh, good. Yeah. Yeah, welcome.
Can you show us around a little bit? Tell us a little bit about your way of sculpting.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Basically, my way of sculpting is basically playing. Just I've got a big pile of waste that I've collected over the years. Like things from the market, from eBay, people brought me. Things I've dismantled. And I just sort of just get hold of it and I try it out. And sometimes, I find a little face looking out at me, and I make it into a little character or a little animal, or a dog or a dancer or a dragon or whatever comes. I never know what's going to come. I just start, and ideas just evolve.
How do you give your sculptures a soul?
Well, I usually find the soul is the first thing I see. Really, I see the character looking out at me. It might just be, two exhaust ports on an engine, and suddenly I see the eyes and the brow, and I think, oh, that looks like a dog or something. And then from that I'll also know roughly what sort of thing I'm looking for the dog. So then I look around for the dog's nose. But then it might turn into something else. It might turn into a man, or it might be turned into a frog. I don't know. But it's basically, but I usually find the character first and then follow it. So for example, in this one I've made a bird here, and he's all made of all sorts of things. He's even got a shotgun in there, and a bicycle saddle. But it was the beak that started it. The beak and the pair of scissors broken in half made the eye, And then I knew what sort of bird it was. I knew it was really primitive. It was like something out of the primordial swamps. So then I followed it through the old primitive bits of scrap, rusty and decaying, But this one, on the other hand, is completely different. She's a dancer and she's graceful, and everything's done in chrome and shiny, gravy boats, bits of tap fittings, So even though it's all scrap, you have to make, ways of scrap working together, get an overall sort of integrity with the piece, and tell the story.
What would you say were your biggest influences? Is it the classics or family, or how?
Well,
what was that like? Which moment when you were young?
I was influenced, by all the great artists I've known, including my father Peter, and influenced by all the great artists that I've seen in museums, greatly influenced by the Natural History Museum and nature, and the way that bones are constructed and animals are constructed and plants are constructed, and a great fascination with motorbikes. I learned my skill in the film studios in London, so I became a film scenic artist when I was young. So I learned my techniques, how to use hundreds of different materials, and I've sort of jammed all those things into one pot, and I've come up with my own style, of storytelling.
And in terms of storytelling, you're really well known for your large-scale installations, the Paralympics, Glastonbury, Burning Man, Tea Party, which we all love. How would those stories differ from the stories that are told in your studio with your smaller sculptures, the intimate ones?
Well, yeah, you've got the right word there, intimate. With these smaller ones, I think I can tell more of who they are. What makes them function, where they are. I can tell a story like this wartime story between these two former adversaries who are now, in this horrible mess they've created in the war, and looking at this one little flower growing out of it, and just thinking about what have they done, what was that all about. So I can be able to tell a story there, which might be not so much in the rock and roll environment of festivals and events, But otherwise, it's just the same stuff but smaller, Yeah.
And how do you feel when I know we're going to leave you soon. You've got a lot of work to do, but how do you feel when you're in your studio, when you're there?
I love it. I'm in a zone, I'm in a zone. I know every piece of scrap in the place, every offcut, and I've got hundreds of things that are half made or just about to be made, or I can just see them and wondering how they're going to go on, and actually just ticking over in my mind as I work away with my hands. And I'm very happy here. I never know in the morning what I'm going to produce that day at all, and then by the evening I'll go, oh look, I made a bird, or oh look, I've made a dog. It's a mystery to me what's going to come out, and that's why I like working this way. because it's very entertaining for me, first of all.
Well, looking forward to seeing what you come up with next.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah.
See you soon.
All right, mate. Bye.
How did it feel for you when you're coming out of being in isolation and going into your studio for the first time in a while to film this with us?
Well, it was lovely, but I did spend most of my isolation in the studio. It was quite fortunate, you're allowed to go to work. And
Yeah.
that was my work. And it's quite an isolated space because it's a studio, but it's got big glass windows so the public can look in and see what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So it was nice, really. It was a nice, quiet time to just, to get into the zone of creating, rather than running Glastonbury and organising hundreds of people and all this, So it was a very good time for me. I liked it. Yeah.
And when you're in that studio, how do you feel? Like, is it your space? Is it your favorite place to be, or is it one of your places? How did you qualify that?
I mean, I just love it. Spaces themselves, seem to. I've got spaces which are perfect for studios I've not been able to do anything in. But this one, as soon as I got there, I started creating. And it's just something's right about it. And I'll just get into it.
Yeah.
And if I'm in a nice, good, not tired or hungover or anything, I can just hit things and bang on, come
Straight
out.
in.
Yeah, it's really lovely, yeah.
And studio's linked to a restaurant, or tell us a little bit about that and in the East End.
It's not extended. It's right by the Shard in London Bridge, and it's an old derelict building that these lads have made into a sort of pop-up bar with street food, big outdoor seating area, and then I've done up all the inside. So first thing I did was I bought a train for the Fast and Furious Roadshow that got bankrupt, and brought it to auction.
Like a life-size real train.
Yeah, life-size American freight train, and stuck it into the side of the building coming out, and then put 9 giant ants built out of motorcycle petrol tanks crawling all over it. Wow. And that's going to be a cinema, but that's just that's your Instagram moment. And then inside I've done up the whole place with sort of mutated architecture, great big log fire built out of an exploded barrel container, and things built out of cranks and sculpture. And then you get to the bit which is my workshop, where you hit this big glass wall, and behind it I'm working so people can see me in action.
So everybody can come and see you working?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And see things developing. And then when it's done, I'll be putting it out into the main area, especially over Christmas, coming up to Christmas, and doing I'm going to do an exhibition. People come down and buy the stuff and see the stuff from the places. So it's called Vinegar Yard.
Vinegar Yard, yeah. And how do you manage all of your different projects? You've got so many different projects. If we Google you, we look and we think, my gosh, she's doing so many different things. How do you juggle the kind of the big installations, outdoor public art, and then the more intimate pieces that are on show at the exhibit here today? How do you juggle some of them is it all yourself, all of your handwork in it, or do you always work with teams as well? How do you work with your flow?
Well, it depends. I mean, yes, you get to. I mean, at Glastonbury last year, I had 240 people working directly on projects that I was working on. And then you get to a thing where we built this pier, so I built a 60-metre long pier that weighed 140 tonnes, with all the seaside attractions on it, and we had, Punch and Judy and bingo and fortune tellers.
Yeah, great.
So they, these are more like jobs where I have to get people into and tell them what I want to happen, and so they're more like managerial jobs, creative managerial.
Yeah.
And the detriment of that is I get very little time actually in the studio on this stuff, which is just totally me really, and maybe a couple of helpers on the finishing. But actually, nature has helped sort that one out, because all the entertainment work's disappeared, all the festival work's disappeared, all the parties and the clubs and all of that's disappeared. So really, I'm just left with my own work in the studio.
Yeah. Almost
for the first time in 25 years, really, So it's quite a nice time, really.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, by the time I've done Glastonbury, I've finished it, put it all to bed, I've had a rest. I've maybe got 3 months before Christmas.
Yeah.
To do the sculpture, and then I start off again, and it's not really enough. It was taking the back seat to the.
When you're in that studio and when you're picking up the pieces, how do you create? Do you have a perceived idea, or do you just pick something up and say, "Oh, that could be a foot or an arm," or do you? How does it organically kind of? Because a lot of them, I know, it's scrapbook together in a way that then becomes art because it has a soul to it. They all have a kind of animated feeling. To them.
And it's art in as much as it is art, really. I mean, it's art, and the biggest skill involved with it, really, once you've worked out what you're making, is how to get it to stay together. In the position that you want it. But it's a choice. The reason that I choose to use waste materials and found objects as opposed to just using clay and polystyrene and wood and all the other traditional materials, which I can use and I can do, is if I do those, all I've done is I've got a pre-thought out idea that I'm trying to aim at.
Yes.
And I'll have however much success I have at getting to it, but more or less it's that idea. But with the found objects, it can take you somewhere where you never thought. You might find a character that you never imagined, and then you suddenly find a position for it. How that was going to work, which you never would have drawn or sculpted in that position. So you've suddenly become, almost like an observer in the artistic process as well as the creator.
Yeah.
And it just takes the whole thing one stage further, and that's why I tend to stick with it, even though it's more difficult in a way. That's why I tend to stick with working that way. Yeah. Yeah,
because it opens up your imagination. Is that why it takes you?
And you're watching. Really, you're observing. You're observing the thing change, and you might change it halfway through. Just suddenly see it in a different way, or you start to make one thing, and you suddenly realise it could actually be something completely different. So you tend to follow the newest one. The newest idea. And you really, what you're doing there is you're throwing up randoms, and a lot of artists talk about throwing randoms, like for sky paintings or for Miro used it a lot, techniques of just splatting until you see the thing that you want to do and then you pursue it. And I'm really doing that same thing. I'm throwing up the randoms of the found objects, of the juxtaposition of them in all the chaos and mess. And I'm allowing, nature and creativity to have a basic input as well. And that's my great pleasure, really,
It's more fun that way, isn't it?
It's a lot more fun, because you never know. You might go in one morning, and you come out with something you never thought you were going to make.
Yeah.
Had no concept of it. And these relationships between these little characters is interesting as well, because you suddenly see that these two characters have got this sort of little relationship. And in my mind, right, I think, I know how they relate, what the story is between them.
Yeah.
But then other people come along and look at them and go, oh yeah, but he's like this, and that's her, and that's his daughter, and she's upset him.
Yes,
and their take on it is as quick as mine, and just as relevant as mine. You know what I mean? I've got my view of what it is, but how people see those characters, and so it's like I say, it's just that nicely bit removed from the artist's ego, really. You know what I mean? So. It's very important.
That's interesting what you say about the ego, because you possess an artwork that you've made yourself, and you have your soul is in that artwork somehow, and then you place it out for the public, and then it doesn't belong to you anymore in a sense. It's yours on one level, but it's also everyone else's, and everyone else then assesses it and owns it in their own way. And
I've got absolutely no attachment to it. I've got more attachment to the bits and pieces in the scrapyard than I have to the finished objects.
Oh, that's great.
I don't know why. So I'm like a really bad mother. Once they've been born, I just kick them out the door.
Well, there's a philosopher that says that you don't own your children. Your children are children of life.
Yeah,
so you have to kind of let them go in the way that you. So your sculptures are like that.
They're like that, and sometimes I actually forget that I've made them, and I see them in people's houses, and I go, "Oh, did I make that?" And usually I find that I'm making something very similar, thinking it's original, and then I realise that I made it 10 years before, more or less exactly the same.
So, I mean, do you have that in your personality, that you are kind of uncomfortable with uncertainty? If you're going with not prescribing in advance what you're going to create, and you have to be kind of confident in yourself that something will come out, or do you ever have that moment of self-doubt in that sense?
Well, no, because I mean the philosophy of that I was using when I was traveling with the Mutoid Waste Company, the idea of the Mutoid was that because you can't really be sure of anything in life, and it throws so many surprises at you. The idea of mutation is that you live in a state of constant flux where you are confident that whatever changes the world throws at you, you will be able to react with them and deal with them.
Yeah.
So you'll mutate yourself. So I'm completely opposite of being worried about chaos, and I adore it and I promote it.
Yeah.
But it's just because otherwise you're just trying to build walls on the sand. The things getting eroded. You're trying to defend yourself against change with vast amounts of money and property and all these other weapons and things to defend something which is basically in flux by nature.
Yes.
So you're much better to just learn to adapt, to be able to roll with it, to be able to look at a situation and look at it in a different way of how you're going to deal with it. Mutate it. So and that goes right through life to the whole philosophy of. It's the philosophy of the sculpture, but it's also the philosophy of how I live my life as well.
Have you always been like that since childhood? Something that you learned?
Well, I had quite a chaotic childhood anyway, because we didn't really belong or come from anywhere, and we were always moving. There were times where we lived in gypsy carts, with a horse travelling on the Romney Marshes,
You enjoyed that as a kid?
Oh, I loved it. Yeah. So that travelling thing was very much in me, and travelling partly because I didn't feel that. And I still don't feel like I've particularly come from anywhere, you know what I mean? So, but that feeling of movement in life, life is movement, and I love it, So I've never owned bricks and mortar, and I can't see that I ever will,
Do you feel imprisoned if you do?
Pretty much so. Yeah, I mean, pretty much so. I tend to just, if I'm in a flat, I tend to just open the fridge, shut the fridge, go in, look at the window, go back, open the fridge, shut the fridge.
That's what a lot of us did at lockdown.
Sit down again, I'll turn the telly on, and then I'll walk out and I'm not comfortable with it like that,
Yeah.
Yeah, I like wheels, I like, the whole thing of, some people, people try and describe what the feeling of life is, and some point it to some god, and some give it to nature. But I give it to rock and roll, to the spirit of just doing things for the fun of doing it, for in the moment, for the fun and excitement of doing it, and so I try and live. That's why I live a rock and roll life.
Is that what rock and roll means to you?
Yeah, it's the spirit of life and energy, and just doing things for the sake of it, and doing things also without thinking too much where it's going to end up.
And what does it come from? The words rock and then roll.
Well, the rock and roll. I mean, for me, the roll is wheels. Having wheels underneath you. Living in trucks and always having cars and motorbikes and ways of moving.
Yeah.
Just rocking along and rolling along. It's just, I mean, it comes from the rhythm and blues thing. It comes from, it comes from American, but it's also everything that I like really as an artist. I've dealt, with the music world and the festival world and warehouse parties, and I'm showing my work in places usually more it's connected to music than they are connected to art. And I find the art world very sterile. I rejected it at an early age because I just found it very sterile and false, at least in this period anyway, in the period that I've grown up in. But on the other hand, I go to all the museums and I look at all the great artists.
Find inspiration at the museums.
Yeah, well, I find most inspiration at the Natural History Museum, funny enough, and nature as an artist. But I love to look at Picasso's work and Rodin and Degas and all the great
Yeah.
But I don't really get on with this conceptualized art to the degree it's got now, where it's got to the point where it doesn't relate to people except people who are in the know or people who are in the business.
Yes.
And it just leaves everybody else just scratching their heads and going, I don't even begin to understand what this is about or how it can be worth that much money. And I think that's done a disservice to the public, really. And I think and it's done a disservice to the public while spending public money on it. And I think it drives people away from being creative. It makes people have no idea. And really, I think the whole 90% of what that is a big money laundering exercise cooked up by the galleries and the the artists and the investors. And it's left the art world into a very messy state, and I could see that coming. So I've never really dealt with it much.
Yes. So when you have your artworks now, moving forward, looking at what you want to do next, what is your focus? You've been doing a lot of these very personal works. Are you going more and more into that trajectory?
I'd like to do environments has always been my thing. So I wanted to build environments, but in the party environments, there were a lot of big things, but they had to deal with people climbing over them, falling over, pushing them over. So you couldn't really get a level of detail into it. What I'm building now, I went to these caves in France called Peshmel, which was where they found the original graffiti.
Great caveman graffiti,
But I loved that. But I was more inspired by the actual cave itself, by the whole texture of the cave, about the stalactites, these things that had formed over hundreds of millions of years. And I was so blown away by the environment. I went back 3 times just to look at it. So what I'm building now is I'm building an organic mechanic, I call it, which is basically I'm building this sort of field, but out of mechanical shapes and rusty shapes.
Oh, amazing.
And cranks. And then within this will be layers of detail where these small characters will exist.
Oh, how cool.
And birds and all that. But there'll be, you'll be able to have that one big environment. And then
you walk in and you've got all...
Yeah, and then you can go right into the details of the characters.
Great.
And that.
Where will that be? Did you have a...
I'm building it in London Bridge, in the place I was telling you about, Vinegar Yard.
Yeah.
So bits of that, as I develop individual bits, will be put out into the main area there. But it will be a touring show, it'll be an exhibition that I can just move into galleries and spaces.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so that's what I'm driving at the moment.
Can't wait to come.
And that also, I've got I'm building a massive organ with a Hammond organ.
An organ.
Yeah, so like the big pipe organs of the church.
Oh yeah, the ones that.
So you know what I mean. It'll have a musical element with it as well. I'm really excited by it, actually. In a way, I hope this sort of keeps on this situation, because it means I can really just build that thing.
Focus and
come out fighting with that.
Yeah, can't wait.
Yeah.
Are we all invited? Is everyone coming?
Absolutely, yeah. But if you want to see bits of it, just come down to Vinegar Yard in London Bridge. It's by London Bridge Station, by the Shard. And the nice thing about the way things are now is when you have an opening, there's just loads of people around and you can't really talk to anyone. And I'm usually pissed in the first 20 minutes anyway.
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean? But you've got time that people can come and talk to you and you can spend time with people. And that's why it's quite nice when it's a bit feathered in like this,
Yeah. Quality time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Real conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming and giving us your time in this quality conversation with us. And thanks for making the film with us, which we loved.
No, I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed seeing how that worked. It was great.
Yeah. And hope to come see you soon.
Good, yeah.
Thanks for today.
My pleasure.
Thanks for that.
That's right.
Did you enjoy that? That's good.
Yeah, good. Yeah. I had to go for the art world, didn't I?
No, you did. That was good. I got that in. I wanted to add.
Gone.
I wanted to add to the art word comment, and then I was like, no, let's move on. Just focus on you.